The forest had always been a place of solace for Eliza. Nestled on the edge of her childhood hometown, the blackthorn forest stretched for miles, filled with towering trees, hidden trails, and untold secrets. As a child, she and her friends had ventured there often, creating games, daring each other to explore further and further into the woods. There was one rule, though, that they never broke: you never stayed in Blackthorn after sundown. Eliza never questioned the rule as a child. The tales spun by their elders about strange happenings, the disappearing travelers, and the faint whispers carried on the wind were enough to keep her and her friends in line. But now, years later, as she returned to her hometown for a brief visit, she felt the pull of the forest once again. The sun was beginning its descent when Eliza parked her car at the old trailhead. The air was crisp with the onset of autumn, and a gentle wind rustled through the leaves, creating a soft, haunting melody. The forest was quiet, too quiet, and for a moment, she hesitated. A memory flickered in her mind. Her best friend, Rachel, warning her as kids, "Don't go in too deep, Eliza. The forest listens." But she shook it off. It was just a walk. Nothing more. She would be out long before sunset. The trail was familiar at first, but the deeper Eliza ventured, the more overgrown and wild the path became. She felt a strange sensation as though the trees themselves were watching her, their gnarled branches like skeletal hands reaching toward her. The deeper she went, the darker the forest became. She glanced at her phone. No signal. Eliza quickened her pace, unsure why an old trail was making her feel so uneasy. She had walked this path dozens of times as a child, but now it felt foreign, almost menacing. Her footsteps seemed to echo in the stillness, and the occasional rustle of leaves made her jump, her heart racing as if something, or someone, was lurking just out of sight. The sun had dipped lower now, casting long shadows across the forest floor. She cursed herself for losing track of time. She had promised herself she wouldn't stay too long, but the forest had a way of disorienting her, making it hard to tell how much time had passed. Suddenly, she heard it, a faint whisper carried on the wind. She froze, her breath catching in her throat. It was barely audible, but unmistakable, a voice, low and unintelligible, calling from somewhere deep within the trees. Eliza spun around, her eyes scanning the dense forest, but she saw nothing. Her heart hammered in her chest as she listened, straining to hear the sound again. The whisper came again, closer this time, more insistent. Eliza, her blood ran cold. She didn't want to believe what she had heard, but there was no denying it. The voice had called her by name. She began to walk faster, her footsteps crunching loudly against the leaves. She told herself it was just the wind, just her imagination playing tricks on her in the growing darkness. But the whisper followed her, growing louder, more persistent. Eliza, come closer. She broke into a run, her heart pounding in her chest. She didn't care about the trail anymore, she just needed to get out of the forest. Branches whipped at her face as she sprinted through the underbrush, her breaths coming in ragged gasps. But no matter how fast she ran, the whispers followed. Eliza, we've been waiting. Suddenly, she tripped, falling hard against the forest floor. Pain shot through her ankle as she scrambled to her feet, but she could barely stand. The forest seemed to close in around her, the trees pressing closer, their branches intertwining above her, blocking out what little light remained. She was trapped. Eliza, the voice was louder now, closer. It was all around her, whispering from every direction. Panic surged through her, and she limped forward, desperately trying to find her way back to the trail. But then she saw it. Just ahead, barely visible through the dense trees, was a small clearing. And in the center of the clearing stood a figure, shrouded in shadow. Eliza froze, her breath catching in her throat. The figure didn't move, didn't speak, but she could feel its gaze upon her, cold and piercing. Eliza, the whisper came again, but this time it wasn't in the wind. It came from the figure, its voice low and raspy. Eliza's heart pounded in her chest as she took a step back, her mind racing. She had to get out of here. She had to escape. But her legs wouldn't move. The figure stepped forward, emerging from the shadows. It was tall, impossibly tall, its limbs long and twisted. Its face, if it could be called a face, was pale and gaunt, its eyes hollow and black. It reached out a hand toward her, its fingers long and skeletal. Eliza, the whisper was no longer a whisper. It was a command. Eliza screamed, finally breaking free from the paralysis that had gripped her. She turned and ran, ignoring the pain in her ankle, the branches tearing at her clothes. She could hear the figure behind her, its footsteps slow but deliberate, following her through the trees. She didn't look back. The forest seemed endless, the trees blending together in the darkness. She had no idea where she was, no idea if she was even heading in the right direction. All she knew was that she had to keep moving. She couldn't let it catch her. Eliza. The voice was closer now, almost in her ear. Her legs burned, her lungs screamed for air, but she didn't stop. She couldn't stop. And then, just when she thought she couldn't run any further, she saw it, the trailhead, just ahead. Relief flooded through her, and she pushed herself harder, sprinting toward the clearing. But as she reached the edge of the forest, she stumbled, falling hard to the ground. Her vision blurred, her head spinning. She tried to stand, but her body wouldn't respond. She was too weak, too tired. Eliza. The voice was right behind her now, a cold breath on the back of her neck. With the last of her strength, she crawled toward the trailhead, her fingers digging into the dirt. She could see her car, just a few feet away. If she could just make it. A hand closed around her ankle, pulling her back into the shadows. Eliza. Darkness swallowed her, and the whispers faded into the wind. The search for Eliza lasted for weeks. The town banded together, combing the blackthorn forest for any sign of her. But she was never found. Some said she had gotten lost, fallen prey to the wilderness. Others whispered that she had been taken, claimed by whatever dark force lurked in the depths of the forest. And late at night, when the wind was just right, you could still hear it, the faint sound of a voice, calling out from the heart of the woods. Eliza.